The federal courtroom was packed, not because it was a high-profile trial, but because everyone knew something was about to explode. Kash Patel, former Trump official, intelligence expert and whistleblower advocate, sat at the defendant's table, facing accusations of obstructing an ongoing investigation. But everyone who knew the case knew the real truth. Kash was being punished for exposing the wrong people. Presiding over the hearing was Judge Edith Ramsey, a towering figure with a reputation for silencing whistleblowers in favor of national stability. In other words, stability for the powerful, silence for everyone else. Judge Ramsey leaned forward, her gavel gleaming under the harsh fluorescent lights. "Mr. Patel, I warn you," she said, voice sharp as a razor. "One more word about classified operations beyond your clearance, and I will hold you in contempt and order your immediate detention." Gasps rippled through the gallery. Reporters scribbled furiously. Some in the audience cheered under their breath. Others bristled in rage. Kash didn't flinch. He simply placed both hands on the table and looked the judge in the eye. The room tensed like a coiled spring. Everyone thought they knew what would happen next. Kash would apologize, beg leniency, walk the line carefully, but instead he reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out something no one expected. A small, sealed envelope. The bailiff instinctively stepped forward. Judge Ramsey's eyes narrowed. "Mr. Patel, I caution you." But Kash stood and said one line that would flip the entire courtroom in the next 5 minutes. "Your Honor, before you throw me in jail, I suggest you read what's been sitting under your jurisdiction, sealed, for over a year." The room froze. The next 5 minutes would not just decide Kash Patel's fate. They would decide the fate of everyone who thought truth could be locked behind a courtroom door. The tension was suffocating. For a few seconds, no one moved. Judge Ramsey tapped her gavel once, sharp and rattling. But it was clear. She was rattled too. Kash Patel calmly handed the sealed envelope to the bailiff. The bailiff, visibly uncomfortable, approached the bench and placed it in front of Judge Ramsey. She hesitated. Actually hesitated. That alone said everything. Because a judge who thought they were untouchable didn't hesitate over an envelope. Finally, she broke the seal. She unfolded the papers slowly, almost too slowly, and the color drained from her face. Inside the envelope, a declassified memorandum from the intelligence community's internal watchdog. Official transcripts from a closed-door agency meeting, transcripts that had been improperly sealed under national security pretext. And most damning, evidence showing Judge Ramsey herself had received sealed ex parte briefings about Kash's role in authorized disclosures, meaning she knew from the beginning that Kash had acted legally. In short, Judge Ramsey knew Kash Patel hadn't broken the law, and she tried to jail him anyway. The room didn't know exactly what was in the papers yet, but everyone saw her reaction, saw her hands grip the edge of the bench, saw the flash of panic behind her professional mask. Kash stood perfectly still. Then, for the first time, raised his voice, not in anger but in a calm that was far more devastating. "Your Honor, the evidence you're holding was declassified by Executive Order 30292. It was delivered to your chambers. You sealed it, you buried it, and now you are threatening to jail me for obeying the law." The room erupted. Journalists stood up. Aides began whispering furiously. Even the court stenographer paused, hands frozen above the keys. Judge Ramsey slammed her gavel. "Order! Order!" But the order was already gone. Because in one move, Kash Patel had flipped the power dynamic. He was no longer the one on trial, she was. And it wasn't over. Because Kash wasn't just carrying papers. He had something else ready, something bigger, something that would make the next 3 minutes unforgettable. Judge Ramsey's face was tight with panic. She tried to compose herself, stacking the exposed documents neatly, as if by organizing the papers, she could somehow reclaim the authority she had just lost. "This court," she said, voice trembling, "does not recognize." She stopped. Because Kash Patel wasn't done. Not even close. He pulled out a second envelope, slightly thicker. This time, he didn't hand it to the bailiff. He handed it directly to his attorney, who stepped forward with a formal motion. "Your Honor, we are filing an immediate motion to disqualify and criminally refer this court's presiding officer under Judicial Code 455B1. Grounds: personal bias, material conflict of interest, concealment of exculpatory evidence, and willful obstruction of due process. The gallery exploded into noise. The clerk tried shouting order over the chaos. Reporters literally leapt from their seats to catch every word. Judge Ramsey's face turned a ghastly shade of white. Because the second envelope contained email chains, communications between her judicial clerk and officials at the Department of Justice, confirming she had been pre-briefed on evidence favourable to Kash Patel and had instructed her team to keep it sealed. The courtroom had just turned into a crime scene, and the judge was no longer the enforcer. She was the defendant. Kash Patel didn't raise his voice. He didn't gloat. He simply stood there, silent, dignified, as the entire courtroom watched the pillars of false power collapse in real time. Judge Ramsey's gavel struck the desk furiously. "Order! Order! You are out of line!" But even the bailiff hesitated now, because they all knew the only person out of line was wearing the robe. From the back of the room, a voice shouted, "Let him speak!" Then another, "Show the evidence!" The chant grew. The gallery, the media, the public wanted it all exposed. And Kash, he turned once more to the judge and said calmly, "You can throw your gavel, Your Honour. You can scream about decorum, but you can't unwrite what you sealed. And you can't jail what you already tried and failed to bury." The chanting from the gallery hadn't stopped. Judge Ramsey's gavel strikes grew desperate, frantic, each one less about maintaining order and more about clinging to crumbling authority. "This court is adjourned," I said. But she was interrupted, not by Kash Patel, not by the crowd, by the sound of heavy footsteps at the back of the courtroom. The doors swung open. 4 U.S. Marshals entered, badges gleaming under the lights. For a moment, it looked like they might approach Kash. Some reporters even gasped, thinking they were here to arrest him. But then, the lead marshal spoke loud enough for the entire room to hear. "Judge Edith Ramsey, by order of the Federal Judicial Oversight Committee, you are hereby placed under investigation for obstruction of justice, abuse of judicial authority, and misconduct under Title 28, Section 455. The courtroom exploded into noise. People stood on benches just to get a glimpse. Phones rose in the air to record the historic scene. A sitting federal judge threatened to jail a whistleblower and ended up facing criminal charges herself 5 minutes later. Judge Ramsey tried to protest. I demand to see authorization." "You can't." The marshal calmly handed her a copy of the sealed warrant. Her hand shook as she read it. Because she knew this wasn't just an ethics complaint. This was the beginning of the end. Meanwhile, Kash Patel remained perfectly still, watching, not celebrating, just witnessing, as the system that tried to destroy him ate itself alive. As the marshals approached, Judge Ramsey whispered something. No one could hear what, and then allowed herself to be escorted from the bench, handcuffed, in front of the cameras, in front of the witnesses she once silenced, in front of the very Constitution she tried to sidestep. The gavel that once ruled the room now lay abandoned on the floor, a fitting symbol. The courtroom door closed behind her. The gallery was silent now, not out of fear, but out of awe, because everyone realized this wasn't just about Kash Patel anymore. It was about every truth-teller who had ever been told to sit down and shut up. The judge was gone. The marshals had escorted her out. The bench sat empty. The courtroom buzzed with disbelief, electricity still humming through the air, but all eyes turned to the one man who had not moved, not once, Kash Patel. The clerk, unsure what to do, approached the microphone and said nervously, "The court is in recess pending reassignment." But the people didn't move. The gallery didn't empty. The cameras didn't shut off. They didn't come for a recess. They came for the moment. And Kash knew it. He stepped forward past the tables to the very center of the courtroom. No script, no podium, no robe, just the truth. He spoke, not loudly, but in a voice that carried everywhere. For years they told us that respect for the system meant staying silent when it was wrong. They told us that order was more important than truth. They told us that justice was about trusting the robe, not questioning the hand holding the gavel. He paused. The silence was crushing. Today, we remembered something simple. The courtroom belongs to the people, not the powerful. He raised the abandoned gavel from the floor, held it up, and said, "This isn't the symbol of power. This is supposed to be the instrument of truth. It only has meaning if the hand that holds it serves, not rules. Someone in the gallery clapped once, then twice. Then the entire room rose to its feet, a full standing ovation, not political, not scripted, not performative, just raw, unfiltered gratitude. Some were crying, some were chanting, some just stood with hands over their hearts. Cameras captured it all, and it would later be replayed across every network in America under one caption: the day the courtroom belonged to the people again. Kash placed the gavel gently on the clerk's desk, turned to the gallery, and simply nodded. No grand speech, no self-congratulation, because when you've already spoken the truth, you don't need to scream it. The world already heard. The footage of Kash Patel standing alone at the center of that courtroom, the fallen gavel in his hand, the roaring standing ovation behind him, hit the world like lightning. Within hours, CNN called it the defining moment of judicial reform. Fox News called it the stand that shook Washington. Independent media simply called it the turning point. In cities across the country, people gathered spontaneously outside courthouses. They weren't protesting. They weren't rioting. They were standing, silently, side by side, holding handwritten signs. Truth doesn't belong to the bench. Kash showed us how. Our courtrooms, our rights. On social media, a viral movement began. The gavel falls, stand with Kash, truth in court. Millions changed their profile pictures to a simple image. A gavel, cracked down the middle, resting on the Constitution. Meanwhile, Congress felt the tremors immediately. Within 48 hours, a judiciary oversight committee was formed to audit sealed cases across federal courts. Whistleblower protection bills shot to the top of legislative agendas. Discussions about lifetime appointments and judicial immunity reignited. J.D. Vance, in a rare bipartisan press conference, said, "Kash Patel didn't destroy the courtroom. He reminded it why it was built. If it takes courage to tell the truth these days, maybe we need fewer robes and more courage." Across law schools, professors adjusted their syllabi. In the fall semester, new case studies would be added, titled The Patel Precedent, When Truth Took the Stand. And Kash? He didn't launch a speaking tour. He didn't start a pack. He went home, back to his modest house, his old pickup truck, his simple life. Because Kash Patel never wanted to be a symbol. He just wanted the truth, to have a microphone for once. But it was too late. He was a symbol now. A symbol that said, you can jail a man, but you can't chain the truth. Weeks passed. The headlines didn't fade. The political world kept buzzing. But beneath it all, something deeper was happening. Something that wasn't about news cycles or partisan fights. It was about gratitude. Real gratitude. One morning, Kash Patel received a simple letter. Not an email. Not a press request. A hand-delivered envelope from the Speaker of the House. Inside, just one sentence. You stood when others folded. We'd like to honor that. And a date, April 15th, Capitol Rotunda ceremony. Kash didn't answer immediately. He thought about it for days. He didn't like spotlights. He didn't chase awards. But friends, veterans, whistleblowers, they all said the same thing. You won't be accepting it for yourself. You'll be accepting it for every voice that was told it didn't matter. So he agreed. Quietly, April 15th arrived. The rotunda was packed. Lawmakers from both sides of the aisle, federal judges, law students, whistleblowers who had once been destroyed by sealed cases now standing proudly in the front row. A military band played softly as Kash walked through the marble archway, wearing no suit jacket, no power tie, just a simple American flag pin over his heart. The speaker stepped forward, cleared her throat. Today, we recognize a man who proved that in the heart of the American courtroom, the Constitution still beats. Kash Patel reminded us that power doesn't belong to the robe, or the bench, or the gavel. Power belongs to the truth. She lifted a plaque. It read, "In honor of courage that couldn't be contempted, Kash Patel." And underneath, engraved permanently into marble, "Truth is the ultimate contempt defense." When they called Kash to speak, he said just 3 sentences. "I didn't come to fight. I came because they thought no one would, and I stayed because you proved me wrong." The entire rotunda rose in a standing ovation. Some wept. Some just stood, hands over hearts. It wasn't political. It was personal. It was patriotic. The ripples from that one day, those 5 explosive minutes in a federal courtroom, didn't just end with new laws or ceremonies. They birthed a new kind of courage. Across America, Law students formed the Patel Society for Judicial Ethics chapters at their universities. Young attorneys started volunteering pro bono to protect whistleblowers and government transparency advocates. Journalists pushed harder than ever for access to sealed court records, invoking the Patel precedent in their demands. Ordinary citizens demanded more openness in their local courts, emboldened by Kash's example. One political analyst put it best: "It's not that Kash Patel broke the system, it's that he forced it to finally see its own reflection, and the people didn't like what they saw." In D.C., a small plaque was placed on the outside wall of the courthouse where it all started. No fancy portrait, no grand statue, just 12 words etched in steel: "The court belongs to the people, the truth belongs to no one." Inspired by Kash Patel. In classrooms across the country, kids learned not just about Miranda rights or landmark cases. They learned about the Patel hearing, the day when a man who had every reason to fold stood instead. One high school civics teacher in Iowa put it this way to her students: "When you feel small in front of power, remember, the truth standing still is more powerful than lies shouted from the bench." Kash received thousands of letters. Veterans, single mothers, teachers, young whistleblowers who wrote, "Because you stood, I'm not afraid to. Because you spoke, I'm ready to. Because you didn't back down, I won't either." And Kash? He stayed the same. No grand interviews, no reality shows, no political campaigns. He simply travelled quietly, visiting classrooms, small town halls, court reform groups, telling people, "Your voice isn't dangerous. It's necessary." He never needed the last word, because he already had it. In every young man and woman now ready to stand without permission. 2 years later, in a different courtroom, in a different city, a new case made headlines. A young federal contractor, Elena Marsh, was facing contempt charges for revealing misconduct inside a cybersecurity division. The case should have been simple. But the judge presiding? A hardliner, an old-school operator, someone who hadn't learned from what happened to Judge Ramsey. As Elena testified, the judge interrupted sharply. "Ms. Marsh, you are dangerously close to contempt. You will restrict your answers. You will respect this court's boundaries. You will not accuse this institution of wrongdoing." The crowd in the courtroom held its breath. Elena trembled slightly. She glanced down, felt the pressure, the fear, the weight of power bearing down on her. "Be quiet. Stay small. Don't push." Then she remembered something. A quote etched in her mind since she was a teenager, since the Patel hearing shook the world. "Truth is the ultimate contempt defense." She raised her head and said clearly, "With all respect, Your Honor, if speaking the truth is contempt, then this courtroom should be in contempt of itself." The entire room froze. For a heartbeat, time stopped. The judge blinked, the bailiff shifted, the reporters scribbled furiously. One voice from the gallery whispered, "Let her speak." Another echoed, "The court belongs to the people." The chant grew, stronger, louder. The judge, feeling the walls closing in, slammed the gavel once, twice, then realized the gavel didn't hold the power anymore. The people did. Outside, crowds gathered again. Signs raised, "Let her speak, Patel precedent, truth is not contempt." Elena Marsh became the next in a line Kash Patel never intended to create, but did. Not a movement of celebrities, not a cult of personalities, a generation of courage. And when Kash heard about it, he smiled quietly in his kitchen, sipped his coffee, and said to no one in particular, "Let the record show." They learned. Years later, when historians looked back, they didn't call it a movement. They didn't call it a protest. They didn't call it a revolution. They called it simply the reckoning of truth. And at the center of it, not a king, not a general, not a celebrity. A man who refused to sit down when threatened. A man who held the line when everyone else folded. A man named Kash Patel. New courthouse designs across America began featuring a new standard, glass walls, to remind everyone justice should be transparent. Public recording of contempt charges, whistleblower protections inscribed above courtroom entrances. In gold lettering, in every new federal court, one phrase was carved near the main chamber doors: "The court belongs to the people. The truth belongs to no one." Right beneath it, inspired by Kash Patel, 2025. In classrooms, kids wrote essays titled, "Stand when you're told to sit." In courthouses, judges cited the Patel precedent when ruling in favor of whistleblowers. In protests, people no longer shouted in anger. They stood in quiet defiance, holding signs of broken gavels and open constitutions. And Kash? He never took a seat in Congress. He never launched a political party. He never wore a crown. Instead, he walked quietly into history the same way he walked into that courtroom. Calm, certain, unshakable. The last known public photograph of Kash Patel shows him sitting on a bench outside a small-town courthouse, wearing jeans and a jacket, reading a pocket-sized constitution. No bodyguards, no entourage, just a man at peace, because he had done what so few ever do. He stood when it mattered most. And whenever people told stories late at night, over coffee, across classrooms, at dinner tables, they would end with the same words. Let the record show. He didn't just win. He reminded us why we fight at all.